Jazz is distinctly American music. It takes the most important elements in our culture and expresses them in musical terms. Jazz is a special way of performing music and a repertory that traces that special way of performing as it has evolved over the years.
The mix of music that became jazz began when African slaves were taken to the Caribbean and brought into contact with European religions and culture. Although the polite sound of Western sacred music bore no resemblance to their own, they found only subtle differences in the rites, and an amalgam began to form. Cross-cultural assimilation thrived in New Orleans, the gateway to America for slave trade from the Caribbean. On Sunday afternoons, slaves were permitted to congregate in a city square to vent their frustrations and pain and celebrate a few hours of leisure through a remarkably passionate ritual of music and dance such as this continent had never before witnessed.
In New Orleans, the lively seaport community provided more opportunity than other southern towns for interchange among people of different cultural backgrounds. Its less rigid social attitudes allowed jazz to flourish in saloons, dance halls, honky-tonks, and other places of entertainment, so that the Crescent City became the first true jazz center. As the popularity of the blues grew, instrumental groups were organized. There were string bands and brass bands. And there were country jazz bands that used homemade instruments like jugs, kazoos, and washboards. And as the music continued to develop a style and repertory, more traditional jazz ensembles began to incorporate its elements into their work. The blues began to move into the musical mainstream in the 1920s, when trained musicians like W.C. Handy discovered the beauty and excitement in this earthy music and structured it in ways that made it accessible to the general public. As jazz developed, great soloists began to emerge and to inspire and influence others. Freddie Keppert, Buddy Bolden, King Oliver, and Louis Armstrong were all from the Crescent City. These musicians and others, like Jelly Roll Morton and Sidney Bechet, took the forms used by earlier jazz musicians and organized their musical ideas to provide continuity, variety, logic, and coherence to spontaneous musical expression. The traditional ragtime band of 6 or 7 musicians grew into 14 and 15-piece swing bands with a new sound, a sound that came from merging the blues with ragtime. In the larger groups, the musicians had to read and write music, and musical arrangers became more important as the music became more structured. By the middle of the 1930s, jazz had taken off nationwide. Big jazz bands played for shows and dances, and all kinds of small jazz combos, trios, quartets, and quintets, played in small nightclubs and on the radio. Radio broadcasts played a key role in popularizing the big swing band sound, and everyone who liked to dance or just listen to jazz knew the styles of Benny Moten, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Fletcher Henderson, Cab Calloway, Benny Goodman, Don Redman, Artie Shaw, Earl Hines, and many others. One of the most popular singers was Ella Fitzgerald. She was such a master at scat singing, that is, using her voice as an instrument, that she could compete with the best instrumental improvisers.
Listening to Louis Armstrong taught Billie Holiday the value of transforming the human voice into an instrument. She became an integral part of the accompanying band, and like Armstrong, molded her songs into personal statements.
Southern trees bear strange fruit.